March 26, 1993, a young American woman sets off on what should have been a peaceful day trip into the Dublin mountains, but she was never seen again. Annie McCarrick, a 26-year-old from New York, had made Ireland her home. She loved the country, the people, but on that fateful Friday, something or someone made sure she never came back. Her last known sighting? A pub in Enniskerry, a man by her side, a man no one has ever identified. No CCTV, no body, no answers. 3 decades later, the question still lingers. What really happened to Annie McCarrick, and why did the search for the truth hit so many dead ends? In this episode, we uncover the chilling details of one of Ireland's most haunting missing persons cases and explore whether someone out there still holds the key to solving it. Welcome to Crimes That Haunt Us, the channel where we dive deep into the most chilling and mysterious cold cases. If this interests you, hit subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments to help us grow. On a warm July afternoon, a teenage girl walks home, greeting her neighbors, unaware she'll never be seen alive again. Within hours, she's reported missing. By morning, her case dominates headlines, linked to a disturbing pattern of vanished women, some never found, others discovered months later in remote locations. Fear spreads across Ireland. The Vanishing Triangle is born. And so too is a dedicated task force, Operation Trace, tracing, reviewing, and collating evidence. The team was initially assigned to investigate the disappearances of 6 young women. Annie McCarrick, an American student who vanished in March 1993. Jojo Dollard, last seen hitchhiking in November 1995. Fiona Pender, a heavily pregnant woman who disappeared in August 1996. Ciara Breen, a teenager who left home one night in February 1997 and never returned. Fiona Sinnott, a young mother who vanished in February 1998. And Deirdre Jacob, last seen near her home in July 1998. But as the investigation deepened, more cases emerged. Women who had been abducted and murdered, their bodies later discovered in remote locations. These are their stories. This series is based on retired Irish detective Alan Bailey's book, Missing, Presumed, featuring first-hand Garda accounts and comprehensive evidence, bringing you the most in-depth look at Ireland's most chilling unsolved cases. Annie McCarrick's story begins in the tightly knit Irish-American community of Bayport, Long Island. Born in March 1967, she was the cherished only child of Nancy and John McCarrick, who instilled in her a deep love for Ireland. Their home was alive with Irish music, stories, and traditions. Annie's first visit to Ireland came in December 1987, part of a college trip from Skidmore College. The moment she arrived, she was captivated. The land, the people, the culture, it all felt like home. When she returned to New York, she told her parents she was determined to go back, this time for good. By 1988, Annie had made that dream a reality. She enrolled in teaching training courses in Dublin, first in St. Patrick's College in Drumcondra and later in Maynooth. It wasn't long before she fell in love, not just with Ireland, but with Dublin man Philip Brady. Though their relationship ended after a few months, they remained close friends, and Annie was warmly embraced by his family, especially his brother, Hilary, and Hilary's fiancée, Rita Fortune. Determined to support herself, Annie took any job she could find while studying. She worked as a teacher's assistant in Ballymun School, where she discovered a passion for education. She immersed herself in Irish culture, dragging her friends to folk music nights, dance sessions, and historical landmarks. She belonged here. Love found her again at Maynooth College, this time with fellow student Dermot Ryan. They were inseparable, and even when Annie graduated in 1990 with a degree in sociology and English literature and returned to New York, they promised to stay in touch. Dermot even visited her in her McCarrick home, but distance took its toll and the relationship faded. Yet, Annie's heart remained in Ireland. By late 1992, her decision was made. She was going back. She planned to take a higher diploma course which would qualify her to teach in Ireland. The only obstacle? She hadn't studied Irish in school, making her ineligible to teach until she completed further training. In January 1993, at nearly 26 years old, she packed her bags once more. This time, she persuaded her mother to visit in April, excited to show her the life she had built. As she boarded her plane, her parents had no way of knowing it would be the last time they would see their daughter. Annie quickly settled back into Dublin life, reconnecting with old friends. She stayed briefly with Hilary Brady and Rita Fortune before securing an apartment in St. Catherine's Court in Sandymount, a quiet, safe suburb on the south side of Dublin. She lived with two other young women, Jill Toomey and Ida Walsh, and the three quickly became close. She had found work at the Courtyard restaurant in Donnybrook. Though it didn't last long, the job would later become a crucial clue in tracing her final moments. When the restaurant couldn't offer full-time hours, she found another position at Café Java on Leeson Street. She was well liked there, known for her warmth and kindness. Customers would later describe her as the pretty American with the heart of gold. Annie was thriving. She had friends, a job, and a future she was excited about. And yet, just 2 months after returning to the city she loved, she would disappear without a trace. St. Patrick's Day had come and gone in a whirlwind of excitement, and for Annie McCarrick, the days that followed were filled with anticipation. Her mother was set to visit from New York, and Annie was meticulously planning every detail. She was eager to show her the life she had built in Dublin, and from the looks of her schedule, there wouldn't be much time for rest. On Thursday, March 25, 1993, Annie finished her shift at Café Java at 3 p.m. The restaurant had been particularly busy, and her manager, Jean, hadn't yet prepared the wages. Annie, always patient and understanding, told Jean not to worry. She would stop by the next day to collect her pay. Although it was a day off, she even offered to bring in some homemade desserts, something she enjoyed doing despite not being paid for it. Her next official shift wasn't until Saturday, March 27th. That evening, she visited a friend's house for dinner. They sat and talked, her mother's up-and-coming visit the main topic of conversation. Annie was brimming with excitement, making plans to introduce her to her closest friends. Around 10 p.m., the visit ended, and Annie's friend and his teenage son dropped her to her Sandymount apartment. She spoke briefly with her flatmates before heading to bed. The next morning, March 26th, her roommates, Jill and Ida, were up early, packing their bags for the weekend trips. Annie, sitting in bed knitting, chatted with them before they left. She mentioned that she had planned to take a short walk in Enniskerry that afternoon. She also had errands to run for the dinner she was hosting on Saturday night for Hilary and Rita, her close friends. And then, Annie was alone. Her home alone weekend would go unnoticed. No one there to see when she didn't come back that night. No one to raise the alarm when she didn't sleep in her own bed. It wouldn't be until Saturday evening when friends arrived for dinner and found an empty apartment that concern would begin to stir. And even then, it would be another 48 hours before she was officially reported missing. At 11 a.m. that Friday morning, Annie went to Quinsworth supermarket. She bought ingredients for the desserts she was planning to bring to Café Java and for the meal she would cook for her friends the following night. Meat, cream, butter, all perishable items that required refrigeration, but the food would never make it into the fridge. After leaving the supermarket, Annie stopped by the Allied Irish Bank, or AIB. She had originally opened her account at the Clondalkin branch when she arrived in Dublin in January, but now she was transferring it to Sandymount. Security footage from the bank would provide one of the last known images of Annie McCarrick. She appeared cheerful, at ease, chatting with staff. There was nothing to suggest that within hours she would disappear forever. Unlike modern-day Dublin, where CCTV cameras track every movement, the city in 1993 had very few security measures in place. That grainy footage would be the last visual record of her. On her way back home, Annie made a phone call from a public kiosk on the Green in Sandymount. Her apartment phone had been unreliable lately. She rang Hilary Brady at work, confirming their dinner plans for Saturday night. She was looking forward to their company. Then she made another call to Anne O'Dwyer, a friend who often accompanied her on hikes in the Dublin mountains. She asked if Anne was free to go for a short walk in Enniskerry that afternoon. Enniskerry, with its rugged terrain, waterfalls and fabulous greenery, was one of Annie's favourite places. Unfortunately, Anne had injured her ankles days before and had to decline. "I might go alone then," Annie said before hanging up. It was a simple decision made in the moment, a small, seemingly insignificant choice, but it would set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. Detectives believe that after making that call, Annie returned to her apartment in St. Catherine's Court. What happened next remains one of Ireland's most haunting mysteries. Sometime after 1 p.m. on Friday, March 26, 1993, Annie McCarrick was seen for what would be one of the final times. Plumber Bernard Sheehan, working in a nearby apartment of St. Catherine's Court, watched as Annie stepped through the front door of her building. They exchanged a brief greeting before she walked off towards New Grove Avenue, where the bus terminus was located. If she was heading to Enniskerry, Annie's route was clear. First, she would take the number 18 bus from Sandymount to Ranelagh. From there, she would catch the 44 bus to Enniskerry. At New Grove Avenue, the bus was already pulling away from the stop as Annie arrived. She broke into a run, calling out to the driver to wait. Witness Bruno Borza, owner of the local takeaway, later recalled seeing Annie running towards the bus. The driver stopped and she climbed on board. The bus pulled away. It was another seemingly ordinary moment, one that would unknowingly become a tragic turning point. Had Annie missed that bus, she likely would not have gone to Enniskerry at all. Witnesses later recall Annie's outfit that day. She wore a tweed jacket, jeans, dark red boots, and carried a distinctive tan shoulder bag. At 5'8", she had a striking presence, impossible to miss in a crowd. The following morning, Saturday, March 27th, Annie was due to work at Cafe Java. She never arrived. By noon, her absence was noticed. Staff members expecting her to stop in with her homemade desserts were confused when she didn't show up. Even more concerning, she had not collected her wages the previous day, something entirely out of character. That evening, at 8 p.m., Hilary and Rita arrived at St. Catherine's Court for their planned dinner with Annie. The apartment was silent. They knocked, waited, then knocked again. Nothing. Puzzled, they decided to wait outside for 20 minutes before heading to a nearby pub, thinking she may have been delayed. After a half hour, they returned to her flat. Still, no answer. Something wasn't right. Back in Clondalkin, they decided to call her apartment, but as they soon realized, they didn't have her number. They called Nancy McCarrick in New York, asking if she had spoken to her daughter. Nancy, unaware of any issues, provided the number. Hilary and Rita rang the apartment, but there was no answer. They mentioned the missed dinner, but at this point didn't assume the worst. Throughout the Sunday, they continued calling. No response. Growing more anxious, Rita rang Cafe Java and learned that Annie had never turned up for work. The unease deepened into outright fear. Later that evening, Annie's roommates, Jill and Ida, returned from their weekend trips. Expected to be greeted by their chatty, energetic friend, they instead found an empty apartment. But what chilled them most was what they found just inside the door. A Quinsworth shopping bag sat on the floor, filled with food Annie had purchased on Friday morning. Perishable items like meat, butter, and cream, left unrefrigerated. It was as if she had stepped inside, set the bag down, and walked right back out, fully intending to return. But she never did. By Monday morning, the growing concern turned to panic. Hilary and Rita checked with Jill and Ida and Annie's workplace once more. Still no sign of her. Desperate for answers, they contacted Nancy again, asking if Annie had reached out. The moment Nancy learned that no one had seen or heard from her daughter all weekend, she knew something was terribly wrong. Without hesitation, Nancy changed her travel plans and boarded the next available flight to Dublin. She arrived that evening, met at the airport by Hilary and Rita, who had nothing but grim news. There was still no trace of Annie. That night, nearly 80 hours since her last confirmed sighting, Nancy walked into Irish Town Garda Station and filed a formal missing persons report. Detective Inspector Martin Donlan immediately launched an investigation. The search for Annie McCarrick had begun. By the end of the first week, Annie McCarrick had been missing for 7 days. The uncertainty had turned into a gnawing fear, and authorities decided it was time to make a formal appeal for information. Her photograph was splashed across newspapers and broadcast on television, alongside urgent pleas for the public's help, and then the responses came. One in particular stood out. Sam Doran, a doorman at Johnny Fox's pub, contacted Irish Garda Station with information. He told detectives Tom Rock and Val Smith that he had been working at the famous traditional Irish pub on the night of the 26th of March, 1993, the night Annie disappeared. Johnny Fox's, nestled high in the Dublin mountains, was a well-known destination, a place brimming with music, laughter, and tourists. A place Annie had mentioned wanting to bring her mother when she arrived. But had she gone there alone? Doran recalled that the Jolly Ploughmen, a popular folk group, had been playing that night. It was a packed house. At around 8 p.m., he saw a young woman step inside the function room. She hesitated for a moment, scanning the crowd. Then, without realizing there was a cover charge, she walked past the pay kiosk. Doran stopped her and explained the entry fee. She immediately apologized and reached into her pocket, but before she could pay, a man standing behind her in the line spoke up. "I'll get that." She turned, seemingly surprised, and smiled at him. She then walked on alone into the venue, and the man followed close behind. Doran had seen thousands of faces over the years, but this one stuck with him. He was certain the young woman was Annie McCarrick. His colleague, Paul O'Reilly, remembered the moment but wasn't so sure. He had been busy with another patron at the time. More troubling still, neither Doran nor O'Reilly recalled seeing the woman or her charitable Samaritan friend again that night. Complicating matters further, there was an American tourist at the show that night who bore a striking resemblance to Annie. Similar build, similar dress style. In fact, their resemblance was so uncanny that, years later, detectives asked her to avoid wearing the same clothing style because of the number of false sightings she generated. Still, Doran insisted the woman he saw was Annie. But if he was right, who was the man who paid for her entry? Doran described him as being around 5'8", of average build, with short dark brown hair in a military-style haircut. He appeared to be in his mid to late 20s and wore a green wax jacket, possibly a Barber brand. A photo fit of the mystery man was created and circulated widely, but no one came forward. Then came a second crucial tip. Emma O'Grady, a former colleague of Annie's from the Courtyard restaurant, reached out to Gardaí with a sighting that confirmed Annie's movements before she may have reached Johnny Fox's. Shortly before 3 p.m. on March 26th, Emma had been standing in line at the 44 bus stop in Ranelagh, waiting for the bus to Enniskerry. Just as it pulled into the stop, she saw Annie rounding the corner from the direction of the number 18 terminus, the same bus that Bruno Borza had seen her board in Sandymount about 25 minutes earlier. Emma took a seat at the rear of the bus, hoping to catch Annie's attention. But Annie, focused, went straight upstairs before they had a chance to speak. A few minutes later, the bus arrived at Emma's stop in Milltown, and she got off. She never saw Annie again. This sighting placed Annie definitively en route to Enniskerry, the very place she had told Anne O'Dwyer she was going that afternoon. Years later, detectives revisited Emma's statement. She remained unwavering. She had seen Annie that day, no question. She recalled it vividly because she herself had been returning home from a week-long trip visiting family. But beyond her statement, there was no hard evidence. The driver of the 44 bus, Paddy Donnelly, could only confirm that the bus had left on time and followed its usual route. But without security cameras on buses in 1993, there was no way to verify whether Annie had reached Enniskerry or what had happened once she arrived. The testimonies of Sam Doran and Emma O'Grady shifted the focus of the investigation dramatically. Up until this point, the search for Annie had been concentrated in Sandymount. Now detectives were looking 15 miles further south in the quiet, rural surroundings of Enniskerry and the dark, winding roads of the Dublin mountains. In the days following Annie's disappearance, her mother, Nancy, was joined in Ireland by her husband, John, her brother Tim, and her brother-in-law. The family, initially placing their trust in the Garda investigation, soon grew restless. Leads seemed scarce, progress slow. Determined to find answers, they decided to take matters into their own hands. For nearly 2 months they remained in Ireland, staying in a bed and breakfast in Rathgar. Every day they combed through the areas surrounding Enniskerry, knocking on doors, speaking to locals, hoping desperately for a sign of Annie. But as the days passed, an unshakable reality began to set in. They might never see their daughter alive again. In an effort to advance the search, they hired a private investigator recommended by the American Embassy. Equipped with photographs of Annie, they canvassed Enniskerry, stopping in every shop and every house along the possible route she might have taken between the village and Johnny Fox's pub 3 miles away. And it was the family, not the Gardaí, who stumbled upon a crucial piece of information. In a small post office in the heart of the picturesque village square, a female employee recalled an American woman stopping in on the afternoon of March 26th. She had bought 3 postage stamps. The McCarricks had been told this location had already been canvassed by Gardaí, yet somehow this sighting had gone unnoticed. John McCarrick, a retired Parks policeman himself, was growing increasingly frustrated. In a bid to shake new information loose, he offered a substantial personal reward for any tip that might lead to his daughter. But despite their tireless efforts, the search continued to yield more questions than answers. With the post office sighting, investigators could now confirm Annie had made it to Enniskerry that day. But then a chilling gap appeared in her timeline. Between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m., Annie seemed to have disappeared entirely. It would not have taken her 4 hours to walk from Enniskerry to Johnny Fox's pub. Where had she gone? Who had she met? Some clues were already unsettling. Her groceries had been left inside her apartment door, abandoned before she could even put them away. She had failed to call her workplace to collect her wages. These were not the actions of somebody intending to be gone for long. Over the years, many men came under guarded scrutiny as persons of interest. Some had been nominated by acquaintances. Others surfaced through investigative work. Each had to be traced, implicated, or eliminated. Some stories didn't hold up under pressure. One early suspect emerged when investigators learned Annie had briefly rekindled a relationship with an old acquaintance just days before she disappeared. She had confided in a friend that she deeply regretted the encounter. When Gardy questioned the man, he flatly denied any involvement. So much so that he provided a fake alibi. That lie alone was enough to intensify scrutiny. Pressed for answers, he eventually admitted the truth. The relationship had, in fact, happened, but his denial stemmed from fear. He had not wanted his girlfriend to find out. A foolish deception, but one that initially raised serious concerns about what else he might have been hiding. Subsequently, in a 2023 documentary on the 30th anniversary of Annie's disappearance, it was claimed that murdered Annie McCarrick was assaulted by someone she knew in the weeks before her disappearance. The American woman's friends and family had revealed in this program that she was being harassed by a man who was physically violent to her shortly before she went missing in 1993. It is unclear whether this is the same man that detectives deemed an early suspect. Shortly after the airing of this documentary, Gardaí announced they were investigating claims that a handbag belonging to Annie was handed into a Dublin Garda station around the time of her disappearance. This revelation emerged following a recent press conference in which authorities confirmed that Annie's case was now officially being reclassified from a missing persons case to a murder investigation. Detectives have long believed that Annie was carrying a distinctive large brown satchel handbag on the day she disappeared. A member of the public submitted messages from a missing persons Facebook page in 2021, where a man claimed that he and a friend had found a handbag behind Keely's pub in Donnybrook, the very area where Annie lived and worked. According to the man's messages, the bag contained identification cards belonging to Annie McCarrick. He stated that his friends handed it into Donnybrook Garda Station expecting a follow-up from authorities, but there was none. If true, this raises troubling questions. Was crucial evidence missed? Was it lost, buried in bureaucracy, or simply dismissed? Since the recent Garda appeal, the recipient of the 2021 messages has attempted to track down the man who provided this information, but he has disappeared. Yet, despite countless hours of work, one lingering mystery remained: the man who followed Annie into Johnny Fox's. Appeals were made repeatedly. His face was sketched, circulated, broadcast, but no one came forward. Then, years later, cold case detectives uncovered a disturbing lead. The man who had paid for Annie's entry that night was no ordinary pubgoer. He was a known hitman for the West Belfast Brigade of the Irish Republican Army, a man on the run after carrying out a brutal murder. The alias given to him in the book Missing Presumed was Manus Dunn, a feared and ruthless assassin with a history of violence. On the night of March 26th, he had been hiding out in a safe house in Rathfarnham, keeping a low profile to evade special branch surveillance. But that night he took a chance. He ventured out for drinks at Johnny Fox's, confident that no one would recognize him so far from his usual haunts. According to sources close to the investigation, Dunn was immediately drawn to Annie. She was tall, striking, and deeply fascinated by Irish culture. As the night wore on, fueled by alcohol, he allegedly began bragging about his past, about his role in Northern Ireland's bloody conflict. At first, Annie may have listened, enthralled by his stories, but as the details turned darker, her admiration likely turned to unease. Some believe Dunn, in his drunken state, divulged too much. He spoke not just of his own crimes, but of those committed by his associates. He may have even mentioned names, something that, in his world, was a fatal mistake. By the time the night was ending, the reality of what he had done hit him. Annie McCarrick now knew far too much. He had no choice. Using his charm, Dunn convinced Annie to accept a ride toward Dublin. He assured her he would drop her at a taxi rank in Rathmines. She agreed, unaware that she had just sealed her fate. Dunn had parked a Ford Sierra in the rear of the car park, out of sight from the pub. beyond the reach of security cameras. He led Annie there under the guise of needing to use the restroom before leaving. She had no reason to suspect that he had orchestrated this moment to ensure no one saw them depart together. Once inside the car, he drove in the opposite direction of the city. When Annie realized something was wrong, she tried to escape. He struck her hard, stunning her into silence. Less than a mile away from the pub, in a remote lay-by, he pulled over and ended her life. Her body was hidden in a nearby ditch, marked only in his mind before he returned to his safe house. Later, he would tell his minders that he had been approached by an American woman who had tried to pry information from him. He claimed he had suspected her of being a special branch informant. To protect himself and the organization, he had neutralized the threat. Soon after, Dunn returned to Northern Ireland. But within months, he became entangled in a separate scandal, a sexual assault allegation made by the teenage daughter of a prominent Republican figure. To avoid a violent internal conflict, the IRA leadership made a decision. Dunn was to be exiled. They secured work for him in a pub owned by an IRA sympathizer in a major US city. Under threat of death, he was ordered never to return to Ireland. This revelation, uncovered years later, remains one of the most chilling theories in Annie McCarrick's case. It suggests that she may not have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She may have unknowingly become the target of a man willing to kill to protect his secrets. To this day, Annie's body has never been found. For years, either Nancy or John would make the long journey across the Atlantic to meet with the investigators, hoping for any sign of progress. More often than not, they left with the same unanswered questions. The relentless pursuit of answers came at a heavy cost. By 1998, the strain proved too much. John and Nancy McCarrick divorced. The shared burden of grief, the endless cycle of hope and despair, had fractured their marriage. John passed away in 2007, his heart broken by the weight of not knowing. He died without ever learning what had happened to his only daughter. Now Nancy sits alone in her New York apartment, still waiting for the phone to ring. Annie McCarrick, the bright, kind-hearted woman who fell in love with Ireland, remains missing, and her mother is still waiting for her to come home. Thank you for watching and listening to Annie McCarrick's story. Please feel free to share your comments, your thoughts, your own theories down below. We'll see you next time.